Hi everybody. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to birth particles and make those particles automatically attract to a certain object using the plugin Tyflow. And without further ado, let's get started. I'm just going to clear all of this so that I'm starting from a clean slate. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to the create icon here inside Max, and I'm going to create a Tyflow icon. Just going to drag and hold and let go, and this will activate Tyflow. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my modifier panel, and I'm going to open up the graphics user interface of Tyflow, and this is what it looks like, and this is how we will control the creation of our particles and how those particles will interact with objects later on. So the first thing I want to do is I want to add a birth controller. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a series of particles, just out of thin air. I might just look ahead of time. I might just keep this the way it is in terms of 350 frames and birthing a total of 200 particles at the end of the process. Even though that we've got a birth controller on, you'll see that even if I play the animation, nothing actually happens because Tyflow doesn't actually know where to birth these particles to begin with. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to create an origin in which the particles can birth out of, and how we can do this is just going back to the create option and going to helpers, and just clicking the drop down arrow and going to Tyflow, and we'll create a Ty icon. Click and hold, and we'll create a Ty icon, and this basically provides a platform in which particles can birth out of. Right now, there is no relationship between this controller and this platform here. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to add a position icon controller, and we're going to pick the icon in which we want particles to birth from. So we'll click pick, and then we'll click the Tyflow icon. And you can see now the Tyflow icon is now populated. Most importantly, you can see now that if we were to start an animation, all the particles are now being birthed on that platform there. So now we have a relationship between the birth and the Tyflow platform. What I might do is you saw before in the first video that particles were dropping from the top and then flowing towards a building or an object. So right now, because the birthing platform is on surface level, what I might do is I might just select the platform, and I might just move it up a little bit, just so that when we birth, just so that later on when we drop our particles, they'll drop vertically and they'll gravitate towards an object. It might be a bit more of a nicer visual effect. But even though that I've moved this platform up, you can begin to still see that particles are still being birthed on the surface of that platform. So we just need to give these particles a bit of movement in terms of its verticality. So what we might want to do is we're going to give these particles a speed controller, which allows them to move with some speed instead of staying stationary. But you can see that just like you've seen in my previous tutorials, when you do this, the particles just birth in a random direction, almost like flies coming out of the platform. So we need to just give it some direction in terms of where to move. So we just need to change the direction from random 3D to arrow along icon arrow, and we'll pick the arrow underneath the platform, so that now when we birth our particles, they'll move in a downward direction. But you can see here, interestingly, that it moves through the actual floor or the grid. So it sort of just does whatever it wants, and it defies the laws of physics. So what I'm going to do now is, but before I get onto that, addressing that, right now you can see that it's just dots. It's a fairly boring looking sort of geometry. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give this these dots a bit of a shape. So I'm going to add a shape controller, and I'm going to change the shape from a 2D to a 3D, and I'm just going to make it a I'll make it a low res sphere. And even though I've done that, you can still see that it's still being displayed as particles or little dots, but that's because the display here is still saying small dots. So I'm just going to change this to geometry, and you can begin to see now that they are little circles. What I might do is, just to make this a bit more nice looking, is I'm going to just increase the scale to maybe by 250%. And you can see now that it actually becomes, you know, a set of balls that drop from the platform. As I mentioned before, these spheres are still dropping freeform in a freeform manner. You know, they're not bound by the laws of physics. So what we're going to do is, and you know, we don't necessarily want that. We still want it to conform to the laws of physics, so that it drops in a much more realistic manner. So we're going to add a physics shape controller just underneath here. And what this will do is, you can see now when the balls drop, it drops onto the grid almost as if it's just dropping onto ground. So in other words, and it's also rolling away. So it's got a few, so in other words, it's got a few physical attributes to it, and it looks a bit more natural. Now, what we want to do is, now that we've got sort of the basic stuff right, now this is where we want to begin to I guess start making the particles attract to a certain object. And so what we might just do for the time being is, we might just go back to the create option, and we might just start drawing the actual objects that we want these particles to be attracted to. So I'm just going to go to the create the standard primitives option and just go to a box. And I think in this instance, I'm just going to create 4 boxes. Random, I'm not too fussed about the shape and size or the height. I just want there to be 4 boxes. So now that we've drawn that, let's leave that to one side for a moment. Now, coming back to Tyflow, you've seen that we've obviously now got a series of balls dropping in, but we want to tell these particles to move towards these boxes here. So all we need to do is, we need to add a send out controller underneath the physics shape here, and this will basically say, all right, now that you're being birthed as a sphere, by the time that the controller gets down to the send out option, we need to tell it where to go. So what I'm going to do now is, I'm going to and we want the particles to find these boxes. And so what I'm going to do is, I'm going to add a find target controller, wherever that is hiding. There it is. Find target, and I'm going to join up these two together, because I'm going to send the particles out to this event. Again, and then once you've inputted in this event, you now can have the opportunity to assign the targets of the target objects in which we want the particles to gravitate towards. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to select all 4 of these boxes, hold down Shift to select all, to be able to highlight multiple at one time, and then I'm going to click on Add Selected. And you can see now that there's 4 boxes that have been added on, and let's just give our animation a go. So you can see now that our particles are being birthed. They're dropped onto the floor, and they're just slowly gravitating towards the surface, towards the box here. But a few things have happened. One, we've lost our spheres, and they seem to be. And when you look at it in a vertical direction, they seem to be moving through the boxes. So let's fix that. Let's just make sure that these display as spheres again. So in this event display, we need to revert it back to geometry, so that when it comes out, it's still a sphere. And the second thing we want to do is, I'd like this to fly towards I'd like this to fly towards. Sorry, no, I don't want the spheres to move through the boxes. I want them to move around the boxes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a physics controller, and what this will do is this will tell the particles after they've been sent out onto this event. Once they've found the target, they'll be instructed to collide with the nominated object, just to give it a bit more realism. So you can see that once you've added in the physics collision here, you've got an option to select the colliders. This is the object that we want. This is the object that we want the spheres to collide with. So we want the spheres to collide with these boxes. So I'm just going to select all of these boxes again by holding Shift, and I'm going to click Add Selected. Then these will automatically update. And just while I'm doing this, I might just go back to shape, and I might just increase the scale a bit more, maybe to say by 400, just so that it looks a bit more bigger in scale. Yeah, maybe 500 actually. Yeah, I think that's big enough. So going back to this physics collision, we've already added the 4 boxes in, and the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just change this hull type to a box, just so that when the particles collide with this object, it recognizes that this is a box, and it might respond better to the attributes of this being a box. So if I was to replay the animation again, you can begin to see that as the particles get birthed, they move closer and closer towards the box here, and you can see now that when they collide with the box, they just attach themselves to it, to the nearest corner available, rather than actually flying through the box, which is what you saw before. So the next thing I'm going to do is I don't want this to. The last thing, next thing I want to do is I don't want this to keep dropping to the floor. I want it to fly out of the platform and just, I guess, hug itself with the box here. And how I can do that is actually quite simple. Is if I just actually click on the original Tyflow icon, and if I go into the modifier panel, and if I go into the physics tab, I can just uncheck default gravity, just so that these particles are not required to adhere to the laws of gravity. So if I was to replay the scene again, you can see that as these particles are birthed, they just fly out from the platform and attach themselves to the box. See that here. Yeah. Now you can see that unfortunately my animation isn't long enough, but that's okay. We can fix that. If I go into time configuration, just this little clock with the cog here, I might change this to 500 frames, and click OK. And then I might just replay this animation one more time. And now you can begin to see that you can begin to see a lot more activity and movement in terms of coming out of the box, out of the platform. So the end result is you get a whole bunch of particles that are attached to the boxes here.